Thank you all for joining us up here. I think it would be useful just to do, we've got obviously titles and names and faces up there. Do a quick introductions from yourselves. So we could start down the Ajmal, if you could.
Yeah, I'm from OmniEngage. I've been with the company for about 3 or 4 years. We're only about 5 years old in total, but I've been in and around the contact center space for decades. I used to have hair when I started out there. And the evolution has been amazing. And to be at the cutting edge, it's a forever changing landscape, but I'm really pleased to be here.
Fantastic. Lian?
So I'm Lian Rowlands, and I'm the Director of Customer Strategy for Fornet. We've been around for a little bit longer, we're about over 20 years old. I've probably spent the last, I'm just going to say over 25 years in customer experience and leave it at that, because then nobody needs to know how old I am. But there has been a huge change. I actually think this is really, and it makes me a nerd, but I think this is a really exciting topic because actually we've got more regulation now than we've ever had. But it actually has turned into some quite exciting opportunities, I think.
Fantastic. And John?
Hey, so I'm John. I work at Content Guru, so we're a provider of cloud communications platforms. I work in our critical national infrastructure team, which is really nice because what that means is I've had the privilege of doing some really quite exciting projects in the last few years with lots of heavily regulated industries. So with that, I get kind of a really good balance of some of the new technologies coming out, but then also navigating those in terms of the context of legislation.
Fantastic. And we just heard from you, Andreas, but a quick intro wouldn't be good.
Yeah, I'm still Andreas. And regulation goes hand in hand, basically, with quality assurance and evidence collection. So super interesting topic for me.
Fantastic. I'm going to kick off with a fairly broad question. Is regulation becoming a barrier to innovation? John, maybe you could launch on that yourself.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, in preparation for this, I was doing some work looking at sort of different markets and different markets approaches. You've kind of got the US, which is less regulated, and then you've got the EU, which has typically always been more regulated. In fact, I think the EU has a policy, essentially, that what it looks to do is act as basically the most strict market to operate in, the most strict major market. And then the idea is that they set that as a benchmark, and then the rest of, and then as a result, that sort of becomes what all the technology providers adhere to, and then that cascades out sort of globally from there. So I was having a look, and even the EU is now recognizing that actually it's become a bit of a barrier. So they're looking now, like if you look at something called the Digital Omnibus, which came out not too long ago, they've recognized that actually like 60% of EU organizations are saying that one of their key barriers to investment is regulation and what they have to adhere to. So they're looking to bring that back in line. I guess one of the other challenges that you have is actually as technology advances at such a fast pace now, how does the regulation keep up? And probably some examples we can talk about in a bit of exactly where maybe not enough regulation has been in place, and that's actually also become a bit of a barrier in terms of deploying.
Lian, to add to that, have you got anything from a comment from Fornet's perspective? Obviously, you're not building your own tech, but yeah, do you find that regulation is becoming a barrier to innovation for your vendors that you work with?
Less so, actually. And I think it comes from a position, the more time I spend with regulators, so I was recently with the FCA, and we were looking at consumer duty, and actually the regulators are starting to realize that they're not there. They don't wake up every morning thinking how much can we fine people, and how much can we how can we get people on a technicality. That's not their objective. Their objective is now starting to move towards outcomes. So the more we see regulation change to outcome-based regulation, then actually the more it supports innovation in its own way, because we know what we're doing, we know what we're looking at. If our ambition as either tech builders or tech vendors or suppliers, if our ambition is customer outcomes, which it should be, and great customer experience programs come from having great outcomes for the end customer, if that's the objective of the regulator as well, then you're in lockstep straight away. That's where you have to be. So it gives us a better view when we can actually think about outcomes rather than check boxes and tick boxes. What we're seeing is it's actually allowing some vendors to actually flex themselves a little bit more and give themselves just that little bit more room to say, actually, we do have some room for maneuver here. We're not just filling in a checkbox.
Fantastic. We talk a little bit, obviously AI is a big topic. I'm sure we've mentioned it a million times today already. We should have had a counter in the corner just picking up every time we say it. Ajmal, just in terms of kind of AI regulations and product roadmap, where does that sit with you? Is that impacting your product roadmap moving forward?
Well, if we think about AI and how quickly it's moved, when OpenClaw was first thrown out in the market along with ChatGPT and then Gemini and Claude, regulations struggled to keep up. So if you think about all of the technology that's now available, you can pretty much do anything with it, but that's the question, is it compliant? And with compliance and regulation should come more sustainable and transparent AI adoption. And that's the difficulty. People are looking at it as a barrier, but it should be that it enables it to be more lasting and more effective with an outcome-driven approach. Otherwise, you're just throwing things against a wall and seeing what's going to stick. And I think when it comes to developing AI products within CX, I think the requirements for compliance should become features of products, because that's where you lay the foundation, and that's how you keep it going in a way that delivers results, but also, like the previous panel said, it includes trust.
Makes sense. Andreas, to add to that, have you any thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, from a technical point of view, 2 years ago, we were mainly talking in regards to product about features, like more channels, more languages, smarter summaries and stuff like that. And now these things become actually release criteria, right? I mean, the whole regulation comes down to also being able to prove that what you do works, which we have lost a little bit over time. When I think about the telco industry, how it was like 20, 25 years ago, you had like all these certification books and whatnot in order to roll something out. Things were just not that dynamic. And yeah, nowadays we roll out new features week per week per week. And what we have forgotten a little bit about is getting the risk away from the customer, because the customer is currently taking all the risk. And regulation makes sure to hold the vendors accountable.
That's an interesting point when we talk about customers, because sometimes when I think we talk about regulation, we think about what's this mean for us rather than how does this impact our customer and what are their concerns through there. Are we seeing customers demanding compliance, demanding sovereignty, demanding things that are going to help them hit regulation? What are the customers' viewpoint throughout this at the moment? Maybe you could give a view from the public sector side of things.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, clearly, in the space that we operate in, it's massive. It's almost like the starting point, right? So I don't think you can really go ahead and consider, for many of the areas that we work in, you can't really go ahead and consider deploying an AI solution if it's not data sovereign. You can't go ahead and, so we do a lot of work in the NHS, and really good example was when sort of ambient scribe technologies came out, the idea of listening to some sort of transcripts and then generating a summary off the back of it. It was a field day at first with lots of sort of vendors who were able to go ahead and put this quite simple technology together and sell it into the NHS. But then there was all sorts of problems that we saw in the market where what you were having was like maybe a clinician would say something while they're speaking to a patient, and they would say, or there'd be some sort of autistic traits mentioned, something like this, and then that would be misinterpreted in the transcript as the person has autism and giving a diagnosis. Now that seems like quite a small thing for us, but if that makes its way into a medical record and informs treatment for a particular person, that's absolutely massive, and that can be a massive, massive issue. So I guess the point is that I think early on, many people were very excited about this, and they went ahead and did it. And then we had this big wave of real AI skepticism because of people getting their fingers burnt early on. So now when we're engaging with organizations, they're very, very rigorous, and they know as the starting point the checks they need to go through to make sure that they're going to adhere to all of the relevant legislation.
Ajmal, on that point as well, are you finding customers demanding this now?
Yes, it depends on the industry, because the regulated industries, when you're talking about Ofcom, you're talking about FCA, all of those. Then there's the GDPR in California. I think they have similar kind of rules. You have to think about where your starting point is. So you can leverage all of the summarizations, agent assist, all of those tools. It's great, but can you let it free to do a diagnosis in the health sector? Can you let it process a financial transaction? Or can you let it detect a vulnerable customer or deal with a complaint? Now, I know most of those industries would say no to that, but you can introduce them as an assistant tool. And what that means is but the problem will always be, again, like that transparency. What did it suggest?
Yep.
So who's responsible for that suggestion? What if it suggested the wrong thing? Can I trace what it suggested? So all of those things people will see as a barrier. It's slowing it down. But some of those sectors, like the health industry, will expect that level of governance. And yes, they will. That will be a minimum. So when you say, I've got something off the shelf that's going to do this for you, the expectation is it's going to cover all of those bases.
Andreas, from a testing point of view, surely that's where you play an important role there.
Yeah, I mean, what we mostly see in that regards is also accessibility, which is often forgotten, because what we see when testing voice AI is, for instance, when a user is actually stuttering, that more often than not, the LLM or the voice bot just falls over, for instance, right? And that becomes really crucial then when I call my hotel and I'm nervous and I'm stuttering, right? I just can't get anything done, and that's like a real problem. And the customers are not demanding that, right? I mean, they are just expecting it to work.
Does that change the procurement process, Lian, in terms of how customers are going through this? Are they coming to you with different questions around this, or how does that change?
Yeah, I think what we're seeing at the moment is everything the guys have talked about actually is table stakes. It's absolute table stakes. So you need to be absolutely crystal clear and absolutely clean when it comes to the basics, right? And the basics are exactly what we've talked about. The basics are data sovereignty, data governance. But what we're also seeing is a bunch of questions coming through that we hadn't seen previously, which are things like, how do you control bias management? You know, how are we making sure that we're not seeing hallucinations within any suggestions? In the same way that we QA, I mean, it really makes me smile sometimes, because I think organizations, even regulated organizations, were for a long time quite happy to have one QA every month from one agent and said, okay, I've measured my quality. Whereas when it comes to AI, we're now talking about 100% QA consistently. So actually, when you start to look at that, the conversation is changing to what we want is significantly more quality measurement of the AI and of the conversations that, particularly when it comes to agentic or, semi-agentic conversations where we're handing off humans to bots, etc. We're going to need to really see an uptick in how we manage the quality of that and how we're able, to your point, Ajmal, to report back on it, so that we can start to build the trust in the systems and the trust in the technology, because I think that's the currency that we're going to be seeing going forward.
That's interesting. Sorry, just to add to that, because all of that data, rich data, you've gone from 1% or 0.1%, you've gone to 100%, but there's a gap in the feedback loop now. How are you sending that back? Who's implementing those improvements that you're seeing the gaps in? And you can have virtual coaches. We do that. That's fine. But there'll always be the place for the human when there's a difficult conversation to be had. And it just means that your data then suddenly becomes actionable. It's just not a pool of data that you've gathered and on every single interaction. But going back to regulation, not to go off on a tangent, but if you're FCA regulated or Ofcom regulated, and you've gone from monitoring 1% to 100%, suddenly you're going to detect more complaints. Now, it doesn't mean you're worse, you're actually better. But on the league table, you're going to look worse. So you have to have that conversation with the regulator. Say, I'm about to do something. And that's where procurement comes in. You don't just turn that on. So you have to have that. They're hard conversations, but that's the way to look at it. And some people might see that as a slow way of adopting it. But it's actually not. It's an effective way of adopting it.
Interesting role there of who plays that role. Is that the customer? Is that the partner who's doing the governance side of things? Who's supporting that through there now?
So that it's the partner's role to tell them this is something they have to do before they go live, and it can help them have that conversation. But as a partner, as a vendor, as a delivery mechanism or arm, you have to make sure they've done that. If they come to you and say, yes, I've done that, let's turn it on, suddenly you're the one on the hook. But at the same time, you don't want your customer to be lambasted by the regulator because they didn't have that conversation.
As Ajmal says, it's terrifying. If you imagine somebody's going from doing 2 or 3 QA checks a month and suddenly you're exposing yourself to that level of scrutiny, you need to trust, you need to have the conversation. The only thing I would say to anybody who is either adopting that technology or selling that technology is have the conversations with the regulator before you do it. They're very, very open to them, and they're very open to those discussions because they do want to be seen to be regulating on outcomes. So have those conversations first with those people rather than just turn it on and then hope to God that, you know, it's not too much worse than it was when you were only measuring 2 a month.
In theory, it's an easy conversation because you say, I've gone 100 times above what I was detecting or evaluating before, and it doesn't mean I'm 100 times worse. It means I'm that much better at detecting it. And those kind of especially vulnerable customers and those complaints, because they're recorded against you as an organization and you're in a regulated industry, same with health sector, insurance, you have to make sure that they know that the reason you're detecting more complaints is because you're better at picking them up, not because you're suddenly worse.
That makes sense. I've got a quick slide I wanted to share, which is from some of our latest research, which was, in terms of the customer demand for compliance over the last 12 months, this was a survey they did with over 50 CX vendors and partners. And we asked the question, how has customer demand for compliance and regulatory support changed in the last 12 months? Just over 40% said significantly increased, and just over 35% said significantly increased. So the majority of the market is saying to us that those demands are coming through here. Now, I don't know if the partners are ready for this in terms of how do they manage this. I don't know if that's a comment or a thought which you can jump on, Andreas.
Yeah, I think it really depends on the size of the company operating voice bots. Large enterprises have their own legal teams, obviously, and they are aware of the regulations, and they are aware that, for instance, in August, the EU Voice AI Act is going to be the EU AI Act in general is going to be in full swing. And that has quite some impact on how you operate a voice bot and who is actually being liable for these kind of things. And you need to provide evidence, right? And the smaller the customers get, the less information and knowledge is actually being there. And at the very bottom, if you look at like the typical voice AI deployments that are currently happening with, I don't know, a dentist trying to do calendar bookings or appointment bookings. I mean, they for a reason have no idea about the EU AI Act, right? But actually they are being liable for that as well. And no integrator is doing the work for them, right? And the further you go up, the more awareness is there. But as you're saying, even integrators, they don't have the tools in place yet in order to provide the evidence that is actually being needed in order to be compliant. And that's a huge problem.
Makes sense. John, taking a step in a different direction around, you talked about different countries and their approach to regulation. And this week, the EU launched the first kind of draft around the Cloud and AI Data Act, which kind of looked like it was going to impact quite a lot of the US vendors or international vendors outside the EU landscape. What's Content Guru's view on this in terms of where they sit?
Yeah, I guess, and it sort of plays into the figures that you've just shown. I think probably the reason why for the last 12 months awareness around data sovereignty and regulation has become so much heightened is, well, certainly in the conversations that I have with organizations, lots of organizations struggle with the idea that actually vendors for a long time have been saying, yes, we can guarantee UK or EU sovereignty because that's where our data centers are and that's where we host everything. Now, all of a sudden, they have to say, actually, to access the latest AI models, we have to send that off to be processed in the US. And as soon as it goes over to the US, it's then subject to the Cloud Act, which means that the American government can access your data. And clearly, if you're like a financial services organization, you're part of critical national infrastructure, you can't have that like a foreign government going ahead and accessing like personal information that's being processed through AI. So I think that's probably why it's got so heightened. Our approach with Content Guru is kind of being a UK-based company. We have sort of an advantage in in that sovereignty space, but then also we've been taking the AI models and then building them into our UK data centers where possible. So wherever possible, what we'll do is we'll take these models and we'll build them into the UK data centers, so then we can guarantee that sovereignty. Clearly, it's not available with every single model at the moment, but as time goes on, we keep trying to load more and more in, and that's been our approach, and it seems to have been successful.
Do you see this from a European standpoint, Lian, around data sovereignty? Because obviously the EU is doing something, the US has got the Cloud Act, and the UK kind of sits, I wouldn't say separately, but yeah, we're not part of the EU, we're not part of the US, so do we sit in the middle of this, or how do we react?
We sort of do, but I think the expectation is that where the EU goes, as a general rule, at some point we'll follow. We'll end up with a version of that. I've just recently come back from a couple of trips to Europe with work, and what they're seeing over there as they're preparing for it, I can kind of see that I think there might be a bit of a rowback, because the challenges that they're seeing, that the European governments are seeing, and our, I suppose, European authorities are seeing it, and they're pushing back on exactly the same ones that we think about when we look at regulation and how it restricts us. So things like vulnerability, for example, the ability to use voice for assessing whether somebody may or may not be vulnerable. So if you think about that from a perspective of how do we identify so that we can personalize differently, so we can maybe have a agentic voice that can speak more slowly, or those kind of things. If you actually over-regulate, you can take that capability away, so you actually do more harm than help. Which is the opposite to what the regulation is trying to achieve. So I think what we will see in the UK is we will see a version of that come in, but I think there will be, we get to learn, we get to start where others finish, right? So we do get to learn from some of the regulation and the restrictions that brings in Europe in particular.
Makes sense. And Andreas, obviously a European on the panel from, I'm going to say, Austria or Germany?
Yeah, Austria.
Austria, exactly. You're at the kind of heart of this, in a market which is pretty heavily regulated. Do you see these concerns coming more and more on mainland Europe, or are they kind of government doing it and being overbearing, let's say?
Yeah, I mean, particularly in Germany, it's a real thing, and enterprises are asking more and more for that. And I don't have a very good answer even to them, because, a lot of these voice models that are out there doing voice AI, powering voice AI, they are kind of cloud-based, right? They are really good. And they are really good, like even open source models that you can use and train. And then the catch is they are Chinese, right? So even though when you run them locally in your own data center, is it still okay or not, right? So it's a really hard thing, and very few companies have the resources to build them from scratch. And there was the question today already, when the UK gets shut off from like the US and the EU, are there proper LLM providers, voice AI providers, running those kind of models completely natively in the UK? I don't know any.
We'll build our own one. It'll be ready in 2050 and it'll cost billions. So just wait, hold the page there. We've got a quiz running up here. If people want to scan this and take part in our Slido, we've asked the question: which will have the biggest impact on CX strategy today? So we've asked AI innovation, security requirements, compliance and regulation, data sovereignty, or other. Be interested to see what the answers are here. Do I have to click the next page to get this to move? Just want to see if someone gives me the thumbs up. I think I might have to. Right, have you all answered? There we go. Oh, AI innovation ahead, 22%. Oh, data sovereignty coming up. I think, yeah, the answer here is AI from a kind of impact perspective is going to be the biggest around this side of things. But data sovereignty coming up number 2 for me. I think this is an area which is going to have more and more impact as we move forward. More and more people are talking about it to me, and having some very interesting conversations about it. Do you think this conversation is going to continue, John, or do you think we are going to come to a standpoint in the next few years, which will be maybe if the administration changes in the US, they'll come to a more of a stable footing?
Yeah, I mean, data sovereignty is always going to be really, really important. I think, like we've said on the panel, right? For particular industries, it's going to be like the starting point that many of them go from. However, as the technology matures, as that there's more capabilities and more options available, I think what you will find is that's what's going to drive the strategy. I think probably it will just sort of be taken as a given that you have to have that data sovereignty, and then the changes that we see are going to be coming about as a result of the changes in what the technology can do and provide.
Fantastic. Only got a few minutes left. I haven't seen any questions come through from the audience, but if you want to ask a question, you can scan the code and ask through there. But just to close off, kind of in terms of regulation and priorities around products, what you're building, has it changed Omni Engage's product strategy in terms of what do you focus on now in terms of how you, what products and what features do you build with regulation in mind, or are you still going what's going to be best for customers?
It's a mix of both, because if you think about regulation and compliance, it's not negotiable. So when you have a customer who's regulated, they're not negotiating on it, it's just a requirement. So our product requirement has to be built into that. So for example, we've done the closing that feedback loop with a virtual coach for every agent. So you have to be able to put in there a mechanism that means, so if certain things happen, you have to involve a human in it. But also AI agents, yes, everybody's using AI agents, but they are now monitored in the same way that a human would be monitored. You can dip into their conversation and monitor it and see what they're doing. You can run the same stats on an AI agent that you would, but they're only running certain call types or journeys, and you have to make sure that they're not dropping anything. So if somebody's calling up and they're saying, I can't pay my bill, you have to pick up that that could be a vulnerable customer. You can't take a chance that they're just going to go down a hole. And it's those kind of things that you build in. I don't think it's massively onerous, as people make out, because, like I said, it's not a negotiable thing. So if you think about it from that point of view, and it's built in as a starting point, innovation layers on top of that. And also, we were talking earlier about the expectation from organizations. And yes, like Andreas said, if you're an enterprise, you're going to have an AI governance board. And you're going to look at what's acceptable and what's not. And they're going to have a target state. They're going to want to be in the AWS ecosystem, Azure. They might want to be in Google. And then what that means is it dictates what you're going to deliver and how you're going to deliver it and the priority that it's going to have. And a lot of that comes from the regulation. The regulation isn't going to allow you to just free AI into every channel and into every intent and every customer type. The regulation is going to dictate that.
I think you make an interesting point around AI governance, of what that looks like, and that's a fairly new role, I would say, over the last couple of years. Question from the audience came in and said, how many more people do you need to deal with AI regulations over kind of general telecoms? I don't know whether that's from a customer standpoint, from a partner standpoint, but Lian, I'm going to ask you that question of where does that, do you need a lot more people in the organization to be able to kind of manage this now?
I don't think you do. I think you need different people. And it's not about managing more risk. I think that's where I'd caution anybody, is this is not about managing more risk. This is about managing different risk. And it's not a case of setting up another 27 boards with 37 people on them. That's not the right way to do this. It's more about looking at what's required and restructuring or recreating those risk management boards and the compliance boards to work with the regulator, not against them. I think that's the key. If you work with them, and again, you focus on outcomes, you'll all be on the same side. So I don't believe it takes more people. It just takes a slightly different perspective on it.
Those big organizations will have a relationship with the regulator already. And like Lian said, it'll just change because you'll be introducing newer, more innovative technology. And it's up to the regulator to change as well, and up to the vendor to be able to close that loop. And I think that's the important point. It's not just a case of throwing more and more people at it. It's just a reframed conversation.
Fantastic. We've got 30 seconds left, and I have a question which I want to ask. Does compliance become a commercial advantage in the future? So is this something which we can turn into, and maybe John, you could answer this from a content guru perspective. Is this something which you've lent into a lot as a business?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. So like, if we think about it, like when we're talking to organizations. It's a really big thing for us if we're able to go in and demonstrate sort of our data sovereignty, some of the highest kind of security credentials. That's a big selling point. Yeah, absolutely.
Andreas, on that same point.
Yeah, I mean, we do see this in tenders a lot. So it's we are getting into projects where we haven't been there before, because there is now like a tick box where it says quality assurance, evidence, and everything around the regulatory compliance, and you just can't manually test your way around that.
Fantastic. So just to wrap up, I feel like we're seeing compliance not only in those regulated industries, but now come across all different organizations. They're looking at this from an AI perspective, but also from a data perspective that goes underneath there. So I think this is not a topic that's going away, and the battleground will be in the future of how we solve this, how do customers solve it. I think there's a lot of help that we can do as an industry to help these customers solve this problem. But let's say a huge thank you to the panelists for joining us. Thank you so much. We'll be stopping for a quick break downstairs for coffees.